co-host me, please?
Okay, so welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening class on In Love with the World by Yogi Mingyur Rinpoche. I thought it would be good to begin with just a little bit of background as to the place where this book is about to talk to us about actually took place. Um, it was interesting to me to start reading this book a second time because I read it the first time before I had traveled to India, and I have a very different picture of actually what a gutsy journey this wandering retreat was that Yogi Mingyur took. So I just wanted to show a few pictures that just to give us people a sense of place. So let us see if this will work. These are not in the sequence that we actually did the tour, but this was actually a cave, a statue in a cave where the Buddha practiced before his enlightenment. If you remember, the Buddha studied with a number of teachers after leaving his father's palace and did a number of different kind of meditative practices and yoga practices of all kinds, including ascetic practices. And that's why the Buddha in this picture is so emaciated, because before he went to Bodh Gaya and determined that he would just stay in one place until he attained enlightenment, that he engaged in a number of ascetic practices and in fact was quite emaciated and lost a lot of weight. But his actual enlightenment took place in Bodh Gaya. This is the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya. The pictures are a little different because they would not let you take iPhones into Bodh Gaya. They're actually pretty strict about that because apparently there was a bombing of some kind a few years back as a protest. And so I had to make do with a portable digital camera. But this is the Mahabodhi temple. It's a little bit different picture of it, a little bit fuzzy, but actually walking down into the temple. The temple itself is actually fairly small, but what's significant is on the other side of this picture is the Bodhi tree itself, which is at the top here of the picture, and this is the group that I was in. Yeah, there I am in the picture. Where we were able to sit under the Bodhi tree or descend into the Bodhi tree just as the Buddha did. So it was here that the Buddha actually attained enlightenment. Personally, I felt like this place, Bodh Gaya, had a lot of energy in it. It was a very powerful place. Not the least of which because there were so many, you don't see it in this picture, but there were so many monks and people on pilgrimages and practitioners all around from all different Buddhist traditions. Southeast Asia, Japan, China, America, European people, Tibet, Nepal, all practicing in this place because it's considered so sacred, because it's where the Buddha actually attained his enlightenment. From Bodh Gaya, which is where the monastery that Yogi Mingyur began his pilgrimage from, as he says in the book, it was near Bodh Gaya. The Buddha, as I think people know, following his enlightenment, didn't know or didn't feel that he would be able to teach what he had experienced. And he actually walked for several weeks in the different fields and forests in India. And actually went to Sarnath, which I actually didn't realize was as far from Bodh Gaya as it is. It's almost 160 miles from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath Deer Park, where he met some of the people who had been his fellow practitioners when he did engage in the ascetic practices. And at Sarnath, or Deer Park as it's called, there's a large stupa. This is the stupa at night, stupa during the day. This is where he met, again, some of the people who had been his fellow practitioners prior to his enlightenment. And when they first saw the Buddha, they saw that he was better fed, and they felt like he had fallen off the path, and were considering whether or not they should engage with him at all. But there's something so powerful about his presence that they did. And he began teaching. They realized that he had had some kind of great realization. And it's here that he taught the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, and so on. And so that's why there's a stupa at Sarnath or Deer Park. Another picture of the stupa from a different angle. There was a monastery built there that's now in ruins, but as you can see, there were pilgrims again in this place as well. Pilgrims from all over the world, all different Buddhist traditions who come there. Sarnath is near Varanasi, which is where the river Ganges flows, and we usually had a boat ride on the Ganges in the morning. You see the sun rising over the river. The Ganges River is considered sacred to in the Hindu religion because it's connected directly to Brahma. These were all pictures taken from the boats that we were in on the Ganges. But along the edge of the Ganges, there are the bhatts, the steps that lead down into the river. And people bathe in the river. Again, it's in the Hindu religion, the river is considered, again, to have a divine connection. The Buddha's comment was that if that's true, then the fish must be the holiest of all, because they're actually submerged all the time in the water. But also along this thing, you have funeral pyres. You can see smoke there, and these are bodies that are being cremated. And when we went ashore, we could see bodies being brought in for cremation. This is a sadhu. And this last picture I just wanted to show, this is actually in New Delhi. If you can just see how crowded the streets were. There is a very, what I would describe as a very direct contact with the realities of birth, old age, sickness, and death that you just run into constantly, particularly in the urban areas of India, where there are people who are begging, people who approach who obviously have some kind of disability or missing limbs, obviously hungry, obviously there's great poverty. And this is the world that Yogi Mingyur, leaving the monastery, was leaving the monastery to go, to directly experience, make direct contact with the world. Much again, really, very quite similar, I think, to the Buddha leaving his father's palace and leaving the comforts and the security of the life that he knew to seek the truth. So that's what I wanted to share. And John, did you want to go on with the prologue?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I visited that part of India as well many years ago. I doubt that it's changed much, except that it probably gotten even more populous than it was. It's really fierce, beautiful, a lot of poverty, suffering, and humanity. Very, very intense. So, Mingyur Rinpoche begins his book, In Love with the World. We should understand that Mingyur Rinpoche was one of 4 sons of a great teacher, a famous teacher named, what was his good name, Michael?
Tulku Ujin.
Tulku Ujin, of course. Tulku Ujin had 3 other sons, one of whom, as far as I know, didn't teach. The second of whom taught, but I've never heard him teach. His name was, what was his name? Forgetting everything here. Do you remember, Michael, the son who didn't teach, who taught, but we haven't heard? Well, in any event, and then there was Mingyur and Sukni Rinpoche, both of whom.
Oh, Chukyi Nima.
Chukyi Nima. He teaches, but I've never heard him teach. And Sukni Rinpoche is a marvelous teacher. I recommend him highly. And then there is Mingyur. Mingyur, I think, is the youngest of them. And all of them were recognized, well, no, the 3 were recognized as tulkus. Mingyur was raised in a very protected environment, so what this book is about how he decided to leave that environment and go out as an ordinary person into India to cast away all of his tulku supports and to experience life in the raw, as it were. And that's what this book is about, In Love with the World. The first few, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the first few pages, is what he calls his prologue, how he fled his protected Indian existence into the wilds of India outside Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya is where the Buddha achieved enlightenment, and Mingyur Rinpoche took off into the wilderness, or as it were, it was not wilderness, but the wilds. And he experienced fear and exhilaration at the age of 36, leaving his post as the abbot of the monastery Tergar, which was outside of Bodh Gaya. A year earlier, he had announced his intention to do an extended retreat. 3-year retreats are common in this tradition. And in fact, he would discard his mantle of being the youngest son of Tulku Ujin Rinpoche, the esteemed meditation master, and he found anonymity in this retreat. His plan was to take the midnight train to Varanasi from the Gaya station. The taxi he ordered did not show, and then it did late, and he took refuge in it. He wonders if Naropa, the great Siddha of the 10th and 11th centuries, started out alone as he did, and how Siddhartha felt when he escaped from his father's kingdom. Naropa, if you recall, was recognized early as a great abbot, a great meditation master, and was made one of the 4 leaders of the great Buddhist university in Nalanda. He was the master of the Western Gate, until one day a hag showed up. She was actually a yogini, a representative of the wild, feminine, enlightened energy. And she asked him, do you understand the words, or they're just the words, or do you understand what they mean? And he said, well, I understand the words of the teachings that he was studying. He was studying books. She was very happy. And then he said, in order to please her further, and I understand what they mean too. She got furious with him. And she said, you need to go find my brother, not really her brother, but her spiritual brother, Tilopa. And he left his post and for almost a dozen years wandered in search of Tilopa, whom he finally found and at whose hands he achieved ultimate enlightenment. And that is Naropa. So he wonders if Naropa started out alone as he did, and how Siddhartha felt when he escaped his father's kingdom. Siddhartha fled his position as prince and went out and wandered. He describes his elaborate quarters at Tergar, the monastery, and the Mahabodhi temple outside of and where the Buddha achieved enlightenment. And his silent goodbye earlier in the day. He had planned to stay away for at least 3 years. That was his plan, and had done all he could to ensure the continued welfare and training of the monks. He had made arrangements to be far away before his absence was discovered. It said that when he left the monastery in secret and he got a taxi, his heart was beating fast as the taxi sped off into the darkness, taking him. He imagines the astonishment of friends when they learn of his disappearance. He had visited his father, who was abbot of the small nunnery in his small room perched on the roof of his house. He slept and taught there, Tulku Ujin did, on a small rectangular box. Mingyur had visited him there and informed him of his intention to do a wandering retreat. His father approved and advised him, just go. Don't tell anyone where you're going, including our family members. Just go and it will be good for you. He's giving up all of his supports. For decades, as part of his daily liturgy, he had repeated, all things are impermanent, Death comes without warning. This body will be a corpse. His intention grew to leave behind everything I knew, he says, with no more certainty of what might come next than if I were on my deathbed. He and his attendant, Lama Soto, knew they would never see each other again. Mingyur's letter left behind for Lama Soto to discover. Here's a quote from it, from this letter. He didn't tell Lama Soto he was leaving. Lama Soto was his devoted attendant. By the time you read this letter, I will have begun the long retreat that I announced last year. As you may know, I have felt a strong connection with the tradition of retreat since I was a young boy growing up in the Himalayas. I would often run away from home to a cave nearby where I would sit quietly and chant the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum over and over again in my mind. My love of the mountains and the simple life of a wandering meditator called to me even then. So that was the prologue to the book, and Michael is going to take the first chapter.
Okay, so the first chapter is titled, Who Are You? And I will say that in this chapter, Who Are You?, Mingyur Rinpoche presents fairly profound ideas with great simplicity. I would like to explore some of that profundity without complicating things, but I probably will end up becoming a little bit more complicated. But bear with me. Who are you? He said that his father asked him when he was quite young, are you Mingyur Rinpoche? When he was just 9 years old. And he said, yes, I am. And then his father, Tulku Ujin, said, can you show me the one thing in particular that makes you Mingyur Rinpoche? And this is a question that we really could, and from a Buddhist point of view, should ask ourselves. Who are we? What is it? What is the one thing that makes me me? Or what do I think it is that makes me me? Because in this discussion of who are you, he presents, again, with great simplicity, some things that we could contemplate about egolessness and shunyata, both, again, with great simplicity. So he says at 9 years old, he looked at his body, his hands, and his name. He looked at his relationships with his parents and brother. But there was no one thing that he could absolutely say, this is me. And he said that his father, Tulku Ujin, made it into a real treasure hunt. That he looked behind rocks and trees, that it really looking for this one specific thing, one existent thing that made him me. And then at age 11, he brought this search inside himself into meditation at Sherabling Monastery. And then at age 13, entered a 3-year retreat, doing many different exercises. 3-year retreat is a quite structured, actually it's 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, structured retreat that involves a lot of different kinds of practices. And with this, he begins talking about meditation and what we might begin to discover through the practice of meditation. As he said, the Tibetan word for meditation is gom, which means to learn to become familiar with, or to become familiar with. And in particular, we could think about what this familiarization process is in different ways that ultimately really mean the same thing. One thing is to say to become familiar with the true nature of mind, to become familiar with awareness. At a beginning level, for many of us, certainly for myself, it's just familiar with the difference between being present as opposed to being absorbed or distracted in thoughts. But as it goes on, and as we are able to develop some steadiness and stability in our experience, actually stay with our experience long enough to see what happens, as opposed to being distracted with the next shiny thing that we discover through our senses, that we become familiar with how mind works, as he says, how mind creates and shapes our perceptions of ourselves, how the outer layers of mind, which he calls the constructed labels, function like clothing that we then identify with, that we identify with our social identities. We identify with the things that we say, this is me. and we identify in a more negative way with things we say, that's not me. And in this way, we construct an identity, construct a sense of who we are, that when we look at it, is exactly that. It's a facade, it's an illusion. He says they function, that this constructed identity, all these constructed labels, function like clothing, and that this cloaks our naked, unfabricated state of original mind. So we become familiar with, ultimately, this is what we become familiar with, the unfabricated original mind, but we also become familiar with how mind sees what it wants to see, how we construct stories about our lives, and say, this is who I am. I did this, then I became that. And I've always said for myself, if someone were to ask me, how did I become Buddhist? How did I end up doing the work that I did? How did I, become this or that? I can construct a very clear story of this led to this, led to this, looking backward. But if I actually think back to where I was at each point in my life, there were many, many times when I had no idea what was going to come next. And that it was just, that I made choices based on what I thought was the right thing to do or the best thing to do at the time. And some led to dead ends and some went somewhere. That there was actually a great deal more uncertainty than the stories that we create after the fact to explain how we became who or what we think we are. And when we actually slow down and settle enough to look, we begin to realize that. And again, he uses the word function like clothing. This is a very direct reference to the word kunzup, which we actually talked about back when we read the treasure, the profound treasure of the ocean of meaning, Chogyam Trungpa's seminary transcripts. Kunzup is the word in Tibetan for relative truth, and it's exactly that we create worlds of labels and stories and concepts and attributes that we become attached to, and they do function like clothing. And just as he says, they cover over, they obscure, they cloak the true nature of things, because we end up living in a world of concepts. So kunzup is another word for relative truth. So he says by the time he set off on retreat, which is where we were in the prologue, he said, quote, I understood that the value of labels shifts according to circumstances and social consensus. So this is a way of pointing to how all of these labels, all of these names and concepts that we apply to things exist as relative truth, that they depend on circumstances and context. And we can see that, we know this, we see this in very simple ways all the time. The one that immediately comes to mind again is money, that we attach so much meaning to, and that a dollar for us people here who live in America, a dollar is money, and that. But you go to another country where a very different currency is used, and it's just a piece of paper, and suddenly a different kind of currency that would have no value in most places in the United States suddenly has value. So again, this is just one of many, many examples. Just the fact that there are different words in different languages for the same thing. All of these point to the nature of relative truth, the nature of and the nature of the emptiness of things. That things have meaning and value, as he puts it, in relation to other things, that things don't have value in and of themselves. They have value because of their interdependence with other causes and conditions. So that there isn't something inherent. Again, this goes back to the question that his father asked him, are you Mingyur Rinpoche? Can you show me the one thing in particular that makes you Mingyur Rinpoche? As opposed to that which only has relative meaning, relative value. It is, there is an appearance, there is value, but only in relation to context and circumstance. So he's looking for something deeper than that. And he said, Mingyur Rinpoche said, in this search, who are you? Or in this case, who am I, as he's asking himself? I'm not my name. I'm not my title or status. that the essential me could not be defined by rank or role. But even though these same designations are empty of essential meaning, empty of inherent meaning, and empty of meaning in and of themselves, as opposed to having meaning relative to something else, that they did circumscribe his day. And this is, so that there is something there, that he is a monk, as he says, he is a monk, he is someone's son. And that circumscribe is an interesting word because, again, it's creating a circle, a definition around things. And he said, when the more you think about this, the more you make this analysis, and again, this is something that each one of us could do so that to maybe perhaps make it not quite, not something so distant, but something that in fact is immediately meaningful to us here and now. The inevitable conclusion contradicts every cherished assumption that we hold dear. That again, when we really contemplate this, who am I? What is the one essential thing, the one unchanging thing, the one singular thing that's not dependent on context and causes and conditions, but exists purely on its own, with its own inherent meaning? What makes me me? That we can't find anything. That there is not any one thing that we could say, that it's embedded. Our identity is embedded with a whole network of reference points, of values and context, and meaningful, yes. And it's not, again, that doesn't mean that we then go to the opposite extreme, which again, of becoming nihilistic and say, well, then nothing matters. Because as he said, they do circumscribe his day. They did give structure to his day. There was a relative meaning to it, a relative value. But he said he wished to go beyond the relative self, this, as he says, the self that identifies with those labels. And he said, I knew that even though these social categories, monk, teacher, guru, even though these social categories play a dominant role in our stories, they coexist within a larger reality beyond labels. We generally do not recognize that our social identities are molded and confined by context, and that these outer layers of ourselves exist within a boundless reality. So he's, again, in making this wandering retreat that he's embarking on in this book, really looking at something beyond the constriction of relative labels, relative roles that he finds himself in. As he says, habitual patterns cover over this boundless reality. They obscure it, but it's always there. And as he says, when we're not constricted by habitual patterns, we create access to those qualities of mind that are vast, that are not contingent on circumstances or concepts, and that are always present. For these reasons, we call it ultimate or absolute mind, the mind of absolute reality, the mind of pure awareness. Mind that's fumbling with papers here. That which expresses our true nature. In the Zen tradition, it's called big mind, as opposed to the little mind that's defined by rules and constructs and relative reference points. Which doesn't mean that it doesn't have its value and its own way of being workable, but that there's something greater, and that our lives are richer, fuller, when we're in touch with that boundless reality. I thought it was interesting that he uses the words that he does, that we create access to those qualities of mind that are vast. So vast meaning, again, unbounded. Mind that when we are able to really touch in with the awake quality of mind, we can see that it's unbounded, that our conceptual mind can bind that vastness or obscure that vastness, but that mind itself is vast. Our awareness itself is vast. I'm thinking of books that I read talking about looking at stars that are literally light years, unfathomable distances away, and yet our awareness can extend that far. We can see ourselves as being, because we deal with, again, being caught up in relative reference points, that we're just in the room that we're in, the four walls, the ceiling, and the floor, but we know there's a world beyond that, and that world is vast, and that it's connected with a vast quality of mind. That these qualities of mind are not contingent, that mind, unlike all things, all relative things, that mind is self-existent, that awareness doesn't depend on anything else to bring it about, that it has no cause, it just is. And that it's always present, that it's the one thing that you could say is unchanging, is the unchanging nature of awareness, always aware. And yet at the same time, it's ungraspable. Trungpa Rinpoche used the word slippery, ungraspable. It's when we actually try to define what is that mind, ultimate mind, absolute mind, it's much like the opening lines of the Tao Te Ching. The way that can be told is not the true way. And in the same way, the mind that can be named is not the true mind on this level of absolute or ultimate. And he says that unlike intellectual or conceptual mind, and even unlike the boundless love and open heart, this essence of reality, this unbounded, vast, non-contingent, always present quality of fully awake mind, has no association to location or materiality of any kind, so that it's everywhere and nowhere. And when we really look at mind, we see that that's true. Awake mind itself, the true nature of mind. It has no materiality. It can't be pinned down to just one place or one time. He says it's like the sky, so completely integrated with our existence that we never stop to question its reality or recognize its qualities. He says because awareness is as present in our lives as the air we breathe, we can access it anywhere, anytime. So again, in terms of meditation or Gom, this is ultimately what we become familiar with in meditation practice. But again, it comes back to the title of this chapter, who are you? What do we identify with? What do we recognize? Do we recognize this awareness? Are we capable of resting in this awareness? Just simply being this awareness? So with that, he begins talking about the Tibetan practice of increasing challenge as a way to maintain a steady mind, which he said is, in Tibetan, the expression for this is adding wood to a fire. This directly comes out of the Mahamudra tradition, by the way. There's quite a bit in there about adding wood to the fire. He says usually we try to avoid those things that are difficult or challenging or unpleasant. But as he says, by using our inner resources to work with these issues, is our only true protection, because external conditions change all the time. Ordinarily that's what we do. We try to work with external conditions to make ourselves comfortable and to avoid the things that make us uncomfortable or provoke any kind of stress or difficulty. And to some extent that makes sense. But his point is that ultimately the real protection is to work with our minds and to develop our capacity to meet situations with awareness and rather than with our habitual mind. Little mind instead of big mind, small mind instead of absolute or ultimate mind. This is quite similar to the idea that Shantideva presented when we read the Way of the Bodhisattva, where he talks about the analogy he uses there is to with walking barefoot as opposed to having leather on your feet to protect your feet. Where could we find enough leather to cover the entire world? But if we are able to wear shoes, if we have to make sandals or something, then we're protected. And in much the same way, we could work forever to try to bring about perfect outer conditions, perfectly control our world. And as he says, circumstances change. And the only real protection is to work with these issues using our inner resources. And this is what it means about adding wood to the fire, that we bring situations, difficult situations, to the forefront so that we can work with them directly. And with this, he describes working with his problems with motion sickness on buses. If people read the chapter, that he became quite anxious about bus rides because of his, distress, physical distress that he would have. And he decided, so when he was on a bus, he would, decided to get on a bus. And he said he decided to meditate. And he began by doing a body scan, just sort of feeling what was actually in his body. What am I experiencing right now? Bringing awareness to his stomach. And he said it was very uncomfortable, but he became slowly able to accept sensations. As he says, I quote, I experienced my whole body as a guest house, and I was playing host to these sensations, as well as the feelings of aversion, resistance, and reaction. The more I allowed to these guests to inhabit my body, the calmer I became. So, again, what he is presenting, again, in a very simple way, is actually a very powerful concept. That, in fact, rather than meeting our experience with rejection and picking and choosing, we can actually just settle into what our experience is. This is quite similar, I think, to what the Buddha presented with the foundations of mindfulness, and in particular, the second foundation of mindfulness, where we just simply become aware of our initial reactions to things. We just see them. We're not trying to change them into anything different. We're just trying to become aware of our very initial reaction of, I like this, I don't like this, or pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, which is positive, negative, or neutral. These are what mushroom into passion, aggression, and ignorance, the kleshas, which is another level of foundation of mindfulness. But it's our very first reactions to things, and particularly in meditation practice, just being able to see that and be with it, rather than immediately reacting and trying to change our experience. For myself, I'll say this is difficult. Usually if I catch myself with this, I'm well into trying to make things better or different. But it's the seeing that's important. It's not anything that we do one way or the other so much. It's just being able to be with our experience. And I love that analogy of just seeing his body as a guest house. And their guests just come and go. It's so it's quite similar in some ways to other analogies for just letting our experience just be as it is and come and go as it will, without interfering, judging, trying to control or stage manage. So with this, he says he began to welcome the bus rides. He didn't seek them out. It didn't go to the other extreme. He wasn't trying to overdo anything, but just began to welcome them because they were an opportunity to work with his reactions, because they were an opportunity to see what's going on and separate things out, which is the other thing that he begins talking about there, that began to separate out the physical discomfort from some of the emotional reactions. Maybe he says this a little later, but the sense of disgust with himself, the sense of embarrassment in relation to other people. It reminded me of when I was at seminary. Trungpa Rinpoche was talking about the Four Noble Truths, and said that when we begin to practice, we become much more aware of our suffering, particularly the all-pervasive suffering. The analogy given is when we begin to practice, it's like a hair in the palm of the hand, but when we become more aware, it's like a hair in the eye. It's very irritating. You can actually see it quite directly. And somebody said, well, why would you want to have your experience be sharpened to that point? And what he said is because then you can single things out and you can work with them. That most of the time we're so unaware and so reactive to our experience that we just aren't able to work skillfully because we just have very blanket habitual reactions. And that's exactly what Mingyur Rinpoche is talking about here, is being able to just simply be with our experience. Again, he began with a body scan. It was uncomfortable at first, very uncomfortable, he says, but then eventually he could experience his body as a guest house. And he was playing host to these sensations, as well as the feelings of aversion, resistance, and reaction. And the more he allowed these guests to inhabit his body, as they will, come and go as they will, the calmer he became. So this is adding wood to the fire. And he says when we're able to do this, and again, the point isn't to become self-torturing. It's just, we work with what we can work with. I think it's very important in general with all Buddhist practices to, as Pema Chodron says, start where we are and not begin with something that's so ambitious that it becomes overwhelming or self-punishing, but to do what we can with any practice. And then add wood to the fire. As he says, when we add wood to the fire, we gain more fuel. And more importantly, I bolded this, we gain confidence in our ability to work with whatever we find ourselves in. So this is not something that happens overnight, but again, by increasingly becoming familiar with the nature of our mind, our capacity to be awake in at least some situations, we eventually discover we can be awake in every situation. So, as he says, we no longer avoid situations that disturbed us in the past or that evoke destructive patterns or outbursts. This is again part of gaining confidence in our capacity to work with whatever situation we find ourselves in. We begin to rely on another aspect of mind that exists beneath our reactivity. So again, our reactivity is our initial habitual reactions. We call this the no-self. It's the unconditional awareness that reveals itself with the dissolution of the chattering mind. So again, it's what we begin to discover when we sit in meditation and begin, allow our subconscious chatter, our subconscious gossip, our internal dialogue to begin to subside a little bit, not by trying to stop it, but just disengaging from it and relaxing and not chasing one thought after another, that when this chattering mind begins to dissolve, we see that there's awareness that's present there underneath or obscured by that. Or he puts it another way, we could say we switch gears from normal awareness to meditative awareness. So again, this comes down to the question of this whole chapter. Who are you? Who am I? Who are you? Are we our habitual reactions? Are we which he calls a normal awareness, with more consciousness than awareness? Or, is there something more, something else that we can tap into? Who are you? With this, he begins talking about different levels of awareness that we might experience through meditation practice, or as well as just by simply paying attention to the actual now moment of our lives. He says normal awareness of what guides everyday activities, but he says this is actually quite cluttered, that it's filled with ideas about what we want, what we don't want, how things should be, and it's full of reactive responses to what we like, what we don't like. Again, this is exactly what the Buddha asked us to deal with as one of the foundations of mindfulness, just to be aware, just to see it. It doesn't help to then decide, all right, I don't like that I like, or I don't like that I like. That's just more of the same thing. We have to actually just disengage, let go of the whole thing and just see it. But all of these ideas about what we want, what we don't want, how we think things should be, what we expect, all our habitual responses, he says they're like wearing glasses, that we don't realize how much they filter and obscure and distort our perceptions. But when we begin meditating, we begin to get some idea of this. And this is where he talked about his feelings of disgust and embarrassment over motion sickness, that this just added to his suffering, added to his distress with motion sickness on bus rides. And the example he gives, and it's, the example that he gives is of looking at a mountain. And he says, we might think about the last time we saw a mountain. We might think about who we were with. We might think whether this time is better than the last time or worse than the last time. So there's a lot of thoughts and a lot of absorption and a lot of judgment. Of course, if he were writing this book nowadays, what he'd probably say is that we'd probably be thinking about photographing and posting our pictures of the mountain. But still, same idea, that we don't just experience the thing. We experience all of our thoughts and ideas and concepts about the thing. And he, gives the example as well of leaving the house for a day of work or whatever, and collecting things, keys, phone. There's a lot of anxiety about the drive. So that what happens, and this is again one of the things that we're asked to work with in meditation, is that rather than simply being in our present experience, we're dealing with a lot of thoughts about the past. And we're dealing with a lot of thoughts about the future, and that all of these thoughts are connected with all kinds of hopes and fears and anxieties. And that even our present thoughts are tied up in judgments and concepts. So all of that's our normal awareness. It's really more like consciousness than awareness. But we are aware. I mean, we do make choices, and we do, plan and organize things, and that's fine. With meditative awareness, which is the second thing that he begins talking about, we try to remove the filters and reduce the projections. We do this, we face, as he says, we face inward. We actually are able to look at our minds rather than looking outward at all the objects and plans and thoughts and hopes and fears and projections. That we face inward and recognize awareness as a quality of mind itself. We remove these filters again. I think people here have been meditating. I think just about everyone here has been meditating with us for quite a while. We know that this removing filters isn't a conceptual process. That what we actually do is by taking a good seat. Matter of fact, maybe we should just do it now. We'll stop for a moment. Why don't we all take a good posture, a good seat. Allow ourselves to slow down a little bit, particularly myself. I'll slow down a little bit. Straighten our backs upright. And just take a moment to feel how we're feeling. First in our bodies, but also in our minds. Become aware of mind. And perhaps we could just feel the breathing. Just feel the breath. And just allow ourselves to settle in this space and time here where we are. Again, we let go of thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, and just settle into now. Just this present experience. As Trungpa Rinpoche says, we're aware that we're aware. And we just simply see whatever thoughts, feelings, anything we might see, hear, feel. We just simply see it without trying to change anything. Just relax into non-effort. When we're able to do this, we can continue on. When we're able to do this, we might see that just for a moment, our perceptions perhaps become a little clearer, perhaps become a little bit more aware of what we're actually thinking, feeling. We just simply see it. And this is by relaxing, letting go, perhaps just coming back again and again to the breath, or coming back again and again to just simply being aware without any particular idea of anything that we're trying to create, no particular goal or project, that the filters and the projections just naturally drop away because they depend on our ongoing engagement and attention to maintain. So we simply face inward, as he said, and recognize awareness as a quality of mind. And when we do this, as he says, there's less mental traffic when we look at the mountain. There are fewer concepts and ideas, and we begin to notice more simple things. And he says, this clear mind of awareness is always with us, whether we recognize it or not. It coexists with the confusion, the destructive emotions, and cultural conditioning that shape our way of seeing things. But when our perception shifts to meditative, or he also calls it steady awareness, meditative or steady awareness, it's no longer narrowed by memory and expectation, or at least less so. That whatever we see, hear, touch, taste, smell has greater clarity and sharpness. This is exactly what's meant in the chant that we do every morning and evening, that awareness is the body of meditation, which is sometimes translated as non-distraction, which is essentially saying the same thing, non-distraction from awareness. Awareness is the body of meditation. Whatever arises is fresh, because we're able to see it with less filter, we're able to see it with less projection. Whatever arises is fresh. He begins talking then about teachings from his father about meditative awareness, and talks about a time when he was sitting on the roof of his house watching road work on a mountain nearby. And then he had the thought, I should be meditating. And so he says, I followed my father's instruction. I turned my mind inward without moving my eyes. So that, again, this sense of mind, inner sense of mind, doesn't mean that we're trying to shut out or ignore the outer world. He continued to see, for instance, the people working on the road. But then suddenly he says, quote, I also saw the beautiful blue sky and clouds passing overhead. I felt the breeze. I heard birds singing. With normal awareness, my focus had narrowed and I didn't see or hear anything but the road crew. But by relaxing and just opening himself to himself, then the world became much brighter, more vivid, and more expansive as well. So this experience of meditative awareness, we're able to just settle into ourselves in this way and begin to let go, begin to relax. Again, not trying to create any particular state of mind, but just being open to whatever our state of mind is. He says, this introduces us to the nature of awareness itself. And he says, once we're familiar with steady awareness, we'll still move between the state, as well, we know this because we experience it, we still move between normal awareness and meditative awareness. And he says that both types of awareness exist within a dualistic construct. There's still a sense of dualism, a sense of something watching and something watched, a sense of perceiver and perceived. But which is, in this sense, when we're fully relaxed, the experience of awareness recognizing itself. And it's when we actually realize that it's awareness watching itself that we begin to experience something of non-duality. As he says, when this duality is eliminated, we drop into what's called pure or non-dual awareness. And he says, actually, non-duality is the essential quality of awareness. That really, when we really look at our experience, we develop can really come to see that this creation of I and other is an overlay on top of the initial experience of awareness, which is just pure openness, that we can't really separate awareness from what we're aware of. Non-duality, he says, is the essential quality of awareness. Ultimately, awareness is non-dual. Yet when we speak of the three types of awareness, as he says, normal, meditative, and pure awareness, that we're talking about a gradual experiential process that takes place from dualistic to non-dualistic state, from very cluttered mind to minds increasingly liberated from habitual reactivity and preconceptions about how things are supposed to be. As he says, there are many gradations to this awareness. This is what's called path. This is the path, is increasingly being able to let go, increasingly being able to see and to let go of reference points, particularly the reference point of duality, and increasingly being able to just trust in, gain confidence in the true nature of our mind, and to just simply allow ourselves to be. That's the path. That is the path. Is being able to increasingly recognize our inherent awareness, the true nature of our mind. So what he says is part of his intention for the retreat, this wandering retreat, was to intensify his relationship to this aspect of reality, and that he hoped to accomplish this by stepping outside of his normal life. And we have moments like this. This actually dovetails quite nicely with some of the recent readings we did about Bardo states, that any time, even with small changes in our life, but we really see it with big changes, we move from one city to another, and we leave one job for another, and we leave one relationship, or when we find ourselves in a new job, find ourselves in a new place, that this does open things up. It changes, again, it helps us see something of the relative nature of the relative things we identify with, because contexts change. And suddenly some things that seem so important, we realize the importance wasn't inherent in any one thing. It was, again, embedded in a relative construct, a relative set of constructs. And that this allows us for some freedom. It also can be very groundless. That's the other end of it, which that we'll see, I think, later in the book. But that there is a real freedom in it, because we come to realize that we don't have to identify with our habitual patterns. We don't have to identify with our past, and that we can actually simply be present here and now. So again, who are you? And he says, who was about to step into the railway station? He's still seeking to answer this question that he began this chapter with. Who is Mingyur Rinpoche? As he says, I had attained skills in recognizing awareness within my comfort zone, within his comfort zone, the monastery and all the roles and the routines and all the attendants and all of that was very structured. Now he was starting on a different kind of retreat. He said, as he says, he's throwing titles and roles into the fire. I would burn up the coarse outer social projections and strategies in order to be free. Free not of life, but for life, for living every day with a newly born engagement with whatever would arise. I couldn't help but resonate with this in terms of one of my favorite quotes from Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Very much going into a different situation, not simply to withdraw, but to really become more open to the world, ultimately. So he ends this chapter by saying that he had some inkling that the roles that he was in, as monk, as guru, as teacher, as son of Tulku Ujin, that these roles had become embedded, and I could not work with them until some degree of fracture brought them to the surface. He called it an ego suicide mission. So that is how he described what he was doing, what he was hoping to find on this wandering retreat that we'll be reading about for the next few weeks. So that's what I came prepared to say. And I don't know, John, if you want to add anything, or we could just open it up, whatever you want to do.
So if everyone could just take a good posture, bring your mind right here into the present. Simple, clear, awake, effortless, really. It's already here. We're just tuning into it. And then our minds devolve into thoughts about what we're doing, about what we're thinking or not thinking, our awareness. This is our fundamental experience that he's talking about. We have this clear, open awareness that never leaves. It's always here in everything. And then in it, like clouds going across the sky, like birds flying in the sky, thoughts and emotions come and go. This is the fundamental nature of our being. So that's what we're going to be discussing and exploring. You could take the spotlight off me now. Thank you. This split between this ground of our being, which is fundamental awake awareness, always present, and then these little things that go across it, like it's small interruptions. Who am I? Where am I going? What's for lunch? What does he mean by that? And then those thoughts disappear, but the ground, this ground of awareness is always there. That is the fundamental structure. Nothing wrong with it. We're just being enjoined to recognize it. Complaints?
I thought it was interesting he used the word steady awareness, but I think because it is the ground that's already always there, that even when there are many thoughts, there's still a fundamental quality to awareness that's unchanged by all those thoughts.
Yeah, it's not like you have to maintain the steadiness of the awareness of the ground. It's already there, being punctuated by our movements of mind, hopes, fears, questions, answers, whatever it might be. This is what makes Mingyur's book profound. He's exploring this, the fundamental ground awareness and its interruptions by thought and emotion. Not even really interruptions. They're more like highlights going across the sky. Days.
Could you, excuse me, could you elaborate a little bit on the three types of awareness, specifically on, I think it was like mundane or ordinary, or the day-to-day awareness, meditative and pure. And if you could specifically maybe articulate the regular day-to-day level awareness and why, because my understanding is it is also pure awareness in that mix. How is that nuanced?
I'm not sure, maybe Michael can help. The basic point is that the fundamental nature of our very being could be described as this awareness, which never departs. It's always present in one form or another. It is punctuated by highlights, sort of loud voices, as it were, that go off, saying, look at me, or, woo, what's for lunch, or could be all kinds of things. And those voices take the form of concepts and emotions, both, but they come and go. They're momentary. The fundamental awareness is not. It never stops. It's the environment, it's the air we breathe. Michael, do you have more to add to that?
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, maybe I can articulate a little better. There's a distinction made between the sort of daily awareness, like what John is describing, that's always there, but is covered over by emotions and etc., memories. But and then that compared to whatever pure awareness is, right? I don't know. I sort of have this sense that I don't know how to differentiate. How do you articulate that part, that difference, especially on that sort of day-to-day level? I'm not sure if this question is pointed in the right direction here, but if I was to try to explain awareness to somebody as a concept
Mm-hmm.
in a day-to-day experience, right? It's not a meditative awareness, it's not pure awareness, but those are still related. I, is it helping?
Mm-hmm.
Mary, has something to say?
Yes, this might be helpful. I can speak from my own experience, which is that as I spent more time with the Buddha Dharma, with the study and contemplation practice, I became increasingly aware of how fleeting direct experience was, that anything that would attract my attention, there'd be a moment, and then I'd suddenly be thinking about what I can do about it, or should I take a picture, or, this. It was sort of like the play by play commentary at a ball game or something. And that the actual awareness of the thing itself, I was started to really, that's where I wanted to be. I didn't need all this secondhand chatter about it. And so at least, but there was always, right at the beginning there was a moment where I'm just seeing it. It's very direct, very simple, plain. Sit, you just experience it. And then you evaluate it, you comment on it. All this internal stuff starts happening. You take out your phone to get a picture of it or whatever. You remove yourself from the, So, I mean, in my own experience, that's the differentiation I made. And that's very much an everyday experience.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Shinyi?
Hi. Just want to share that Mira and I had the good fortune of attending a live teaching in person by Mingyur Rinpoche in the past weekend and Friday, well, 2 Fridays. And it's been another 5-day program with Mingyur Rinpoche as well. So it has been wonderful and very recent, which just happened last week. So I'm gonna take a wild guess at kind of the distinction between the three kinds of awareness, because something that Mingyur Rinpoche said in the program, I think may be relevant, is that he said kind of the fundamental nature of our mind is the same. It's always there. And the difference really is our view or our recognition of that nature, of that awareness. And the more we progress on a path, the more we recognize and the more clear our view is. And I think that may be the distinction between kind of three levels, because fundamentally it's our awareness is always there. It's not that our awareness that gets better, but it's our recognition that progresses. So there's that. Yeah.
I was trying to think of an example, but there's a problem with any metaphor I can come up with. But what I will say is, if you've had the experience in meditation of what it feels like, what the difference is when we simply see thoughts as thoughts, as opposed to taking thoughts to be real or having some reality, some real, that we actually identify with a thought instead of just seeing a thought as a thought, and that, I think along with what Shin Yi said, that it's a point of view, but really, it's how we experience awareness that's different. It's not that there are three types of awareness. There's just three types of overlay actually no overlay, and then the types of overlay we put on top of that. And I think we have glimpses of that in our practice when we're able to actually see a thought as a thought and just let it go. That we don't have to react to it. We don't have to take it as being true of ourselves or true of somebody else or true about things. And that we can just drop it. And then, the description, the word that people sometimes use back in, earlier in my life, was that thoughts become transparent. And we start seeing through them as feeling like that, again, that they really have some kind of reality that they don't. And we see this from time to time in meditation practice. We see it in our lives sometimes. We realize, oh, I thought it was such and such a way, or whatever, and then we realize it wasn't. And but we just think, oh, I was wrong, instead of seeing that in fact that actually is saying something quite fundamentally true about the nature of our thoughts, the nature of our concepts. And the more that we're able to see that, the more that we're able to just simply be with that awareness rather than getting swept away or caught up in thoughts, the more that we experience pure awareness that's always there and is actually the ground for the meditative awareness and normal awareness that he also describes.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar. What Michael was talking about, it's when I can be very much very much aware of a narrative that's making me be in a certain mood state, or it's making me sad or making me happy or making me hopeless. But the meditative awareness it's not being lost in that. It's being very aware that I am telling myself a story, and I'm recognizing the temporary nature and that of the thoughts, and that I don't have to do anything to change my experience, because the unpleasant thoughts and feelings will go away by themselves, just like everything else does. I feel like we are very aware of the temporary nature of pleasant experience. We're very aware that that's going to go away, with change sooner than we would like. But we don't see the same, we don't see it the same way. And this is where meditative awareness comes in, because when I'm in meditative awareness, I see that the unpleasant thoughts and unpleasant experience is just as temporary as the pleasant. And seeing the temporary nature of things and the impermanent nature of things, even if you're telling yourself the same story, is meditative awareness, fundamentally, right? And anyway, That's how I would distinguish it, days and rush. Yeah. Recognizing the nature of thought instead of getting caught up in the story itself. Right?
Vicky? See, Vicky, you had your hand up, but you're still muted.
Looks like she's working on it.
Oh, okay. All right.
There we
Here I
go.
found it. Sorry. Yeah. I feel similarly as Dan when I'm, either something real pleasant that's sticky or real aversive, causing me emotions that are uncomfortable, like worry or just, um, that's one aspect of it. I find that the in between, the pause, is dynamic. There's nothing static about it. The best opportunity I have is when I'm meditating or I'm trying to, and something really surprising, like some memory from when I was in grad school, just out of nowhere, kind of pops up. And since it's not sticky, I can notice a lot more the dynamic of what's going on. What I kind of do is I go, huh, look at that. And my experience is in less than 20 seconds, anything is gone out of your head. Literally. I mean, I think you could. And so those are helpful moments when something really out of context, rather than something I'm, you know, gnawing on day in and day out, shows up, because I just go, huh, and it goes on by. And it's as soon as it's by and I'm aware of that pause, it's like the pause at the end of your breath before you pull a new one in, or the pause when you pull it in before you let it out. To me, that's kind of what we're trying to get our arms around. It's very fleeting, because we tend to think, oh, awareness, it's going to be permanent. It's not. It's as fast as a raindrop going by. So I kind of cherish the moments when something just pops in my head like that, because it's not sticky. It's the sticky stuff that I think most of us struggle with. That's just my experience. I can really watch my mind in that situation. I feel like I'm actually watching my mind. And it's empty. That pause between the raindrops, it's empty.
Actually, mind watching itself, but yes. Yes. I was thinking of that, about identifying with thoughts, as I had, the stove. It was in the middle of a lot of other things, but we had the stove suddenly not work, the oven not work, and I started having this thought of, why do things always go wrong for, why do things always go wrong for me? And I started really feeling this sense of being victimized. And then I caught myself saying, why are you thinking this way? And I was able to let it go. And it was just realizing it was a thought. I know historically where it came from, or what its historical ground is, but I realized that I could just let it go. That it was just one more thing happening. Not the thing I would have wanted to happen if I had a choice, but that's just the way it went. So yeah, it's mind watching mind, and just you don't have to believe everything you think.
We have this impression that our thoughts are real in some way. And yet, you have this thought and it's gone. You have thousands of thoughts. Where'd they go? They just evaporated, disappeared. What doesn't disappear is this ongoing awareness of whatever is happening now. That is the space in which these momentary events, mental events, thoughts, I am who I am, I hate that person, I love this person, I have this ambition, I'm worried about that. These thoughts are all coming and going in rapid time. And then they're gone. And we don't even think about them anymore. It's poof, it's gone. But what doesn't go is this background of intelligence, of awareness, the sky that hosts the clouds of thought. And that is what is being pointed out to us. Would you say, Michael?
I would fully agree.
So we're being drawn into the world of reality and out of this dream world where thought is so important, because it's not. It's just a momentary blip, like a headline that appears, in the sky, like a sky. Remember when planes used to fly across the sky carrying trailers with messages on them? By Ajax, the foaming cleanser, and a plane would go by and it would have this big thing going. That's what thoughts are, and then they're gone.
Yep.
Where did those go anyhow? I guess they figured they just weren't worth the money. It's a shame, huh?
Well,
I love the idea of ego suicide that Mingyur
ego
talks
suicide. Yeah, ego suicide mission. Yes.
about. Ego suicide mission. Exactly.
We're near the end, so anybody who has anything important to say, it's now.
Or come tomorrow night.
Huh?
Or come tomorrow night.
Or come tomorrow night to the discussion, yeah.
Make a note to yourself so you don't forget. Bring up whatever it is you were just thinking about.
In the sky of awareness.
Yes. Write it down before the banner, the plane disappears.
Okay, who's leading the chants now?
I was reciting them with Sue, but she's off, so I can do it if you put them up.
You want me to put them up or you?
If you can put them up,
Okay,
the dedication of merit.
sure. Whoops. Wrong. Sorry. See. Maybe.
Oh, you can look for it. Hold on.
Here we go.
Okay, so we'll close our class, with dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Wonderful to see everyone again.
Michael and John, great to see
Thank
you.
Yes, great to be back. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Good to be back.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Band is back together. Yay!
Yeah.
It's like the Blues Brothers, right? Pan.
There you go.
It
John,
gives
how
you
about
a-
skywriting as opposed to those signs they dragged? How about skywriting as advertisements?
Skywriting, right.
Skywriting.
The plane with its tail. I think that's a great graphic image, John. Thank you.
He used to write with the contrail though, with the smoke, and then it would just
Oh
disappear.
yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Beautiful image.
Yeah.
And now we disappear. Good night.
Good
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Ready.
See you all tomorrow or whenever.
Bye, Michael.
All right. Good night.